One of my mentors was Howard Zinn, and from Howard Zinn I learned many things, but particularly injecting humor and levity in discussions like this. And so some years ago, I invented a character. Some of you may be familiar with him. He's a very well-known journalist. His name is Dick Veneer. And Dick is in the house. We interrupt this program from the Peace House in Portland to bring you this breaking news story from TIBC, the Truth in Broadcasting Corporation, from our secret underground location in Area 51 in Roswell, New Mexico. I'm Dick Veneer, your glib and banal anchor of Facade News, the 24/7 newscast dedicated to keeping you in the dark. We go straight to the surface of a story, and we stay there. No one can challenge our in-shallow reporting. We're inspired by the highest ideals of journalism. We deceive, you believe. Ladies and gentlemen, an amazing story coming across our news desk. According to an obscure radio station in Portland, in the southeast part of that city, KBOO is reporting that Ben Bernanke, Hank Paulson, Timothy Geithner, Alan Greenspan, and Larry Summers, and other government officials and bankers have been arrested for financial crimes against the American people and the planet. Also taken into custody were Bill O'Reilly, Sean Hannity, Cokie Roberts, and Wolf Blitzer for lying to the American people. They were all found in locked embrace in a bunker under Powell's bookstore on Hawthorne, not the Burnside Bridge, with trillions of dollars in cash, a stash of World Wrestling Federation DVDs, and a massive collection of Pat Boone and Barry Manilow CDs, and scores of unopened Papa John's pizza boxes. The arrests were made by a heretofore unknown group calling itself PULIF, the Portland Liberation Front. According to Peggy, a spokesperson for this group who refused to give her last name, incidentally, she said, "This action is long overdue. We're dedicated to nonviolence and did not use force, but we had to act. We could no longer wait for the Obama Justice Department to enforce the law. They must face justice," she said, with her voice rising in indignation. The prisoners in foot shackles and handcuffs in orange jumpsuits and with black cloaks over their head were later reported to have defiantly shouted at their captors, "Do you know who we are? We are the masters of the universe." And then, inexplicably, each one of them burst into tears and said, "I want my mommy." If convicted, they'll do time in Guantanamo. You'll remember the infamous U.S. prison that was returned to Cuban sovereignty right after Christmas Day in 2013. It looks like curtains for the former rulers of the earth. Their heads were bowed as they were led away by blue-helmeted peacekeepers of PULIF, the Portland Liberation Front. I'm Dick Veneer, your still glib and banal anchor of Facade News. Stay tuned to the TIBC network for updates on this breaking news story. Remember, we deceive, you believe. You either watch our news or you will be watched. And now back to the Peace House for our regularly scheduled program. So Dick is, an extraordinary journalist and follows me around the country and around the world. And I'm glad that he was able to inject himself this evening. And I've also written, I think you'll get the drift pretty soon, that I'm kind of a frustrated stand-up comic and would-be performer. But I also wrote a little ditty for the occasion, and I'd like to spring it on you. Hey, hey, NSA, who you going to spy on today? Hey, hey, TSA, who you going to frisk over at the airport today? UAVs rain death from the skies. Pilotless drones will blow out your eyes. Look out, here comes the FBI. IEDs, RPGs, WMDs, CIA, NSC, DEA. There goes the USA. There goes the USA. There goes the USA. And I have here in my hand, I sound like Senator McCarthy in the 1950s, who would wave a piece of paper in the Senate, on the Senate floor with 256 communist sympathizers in the State Department, and then the next day it would be 184, and he kept changing the numbers. Finally, people started to do the math, and there were more people being accused than were actual employees at the State Department. But I have here a very esoteric document. Let me see. It's called the Constitution of the United States of America. This was found in the tomb of Ramses II in Giza. Copies were made of it, and it's now in saran wrap at the National Archives in Washington. So next time you go to their nation's capital, be sure to, catch a glimpse of this historic document. And I was looking at it, and particularly several of these amendments. For example, the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or of the right to peacefully assemble, the right of the people to peacefully to assemble, to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Now, I don't know what happened to the occupied encampments here in Portland, but I can tell you in other parts of the country, state security forces moved in and used power to destroy the encampments, people who were peacefully assembling to address grievances to the government. Freedom of speech and of the press, well, that one's kind of pretty shaky these days, with journalists coming under indictment and their sources in various agencies being frozen and also being threatened with political prosecution. Now, we have also something called the Sixth Amendment. In all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial. Well, that one's a little shaky indeed. And there are other amendments here. The right. How about this one? Given what's happened over the last 6 months. Amendment 4, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures that shall not be violated. Has anyone heard of Edward Snowden and Chelsea Manning? Real freedom fighters who have made an enormous contribution politically, socially, morally, the action that they both took at tremendous personal risk. And it was interesting to see the flood of, media attacks against both of them. They were charlatans, they were narcissists, they were looking out to make an enormous amount of money, absolutely misrepresenting their character. And if Obama had any cojones, note the conjecture there, he would give the Nobel Prize that he undeservedly received to a couple of people that really deserve it, Edward Snowden and Chelsea Manning. And what is the message that is conveyed to other citizens? That if you step out of line, you're not only going to be hounded, you're going to be prosecuted, you're going to be chased to the ends of the earth by this administration led by a constitutional lawyer. And We saw the case, particularly with Snowden, which is simply scandalous. I mean, they risked the life of Evo Morales by refusing to grant his plane landing rights in NATO countries in Europe. This just happened a couple of months ago because they thought, well, Snowden might be hiding out on the plane because Snowden said he really wanted to go to Ecuador, and Ecuador had made some representations about granting asylum to Snowden. So here the plane of the duly elected president of Bolivia, the first indigenous elected person in all of Latin America and Central America, endangering his life. Ultimately, he was able to land in Austria. But could you imagine if Bolivia, or if they even have an Air Force, or Ecuador would do that to Air Force One, what the response might be? One could only let the imagination run wild to find out, what kind of military action the U.S. would take, and the indignation, the UN resolutions, the condemnation, Christiana Monpour, beating her breast that the United States is the most moral nation on earth. This is a direct quote. She did say that. Yeah, and that it is a symbol of justice. This is when she was in high dudgeon leading the war cries to bomb Syria a couple of months ago. Before I continue any further, I'd like to interrupt myself for a non-commercial message. Some of you here are old enough to remember a class in school called penmanship. One person back there. Okay. It was the art of writing clearly. I have to say this because I pass out a sign-up sheet to get on the alternative radio list, and I can't read 3/4 of the addresses or the names because people have kind of not taken this class or have forgotten it. So if you'd like to be on the alternative radio mailing list, please, just your name and your email address. Rest assured, I will not share this with the NSA because they already have all your information. So you're fine. Well, I want to do something uncharacteristic in terms of the left, where we sometimes revel in gloom and doom. I'd like to talk about some really great positive things that are going on. First and foremost, look, now we've got the Pope on our side. Hey. On the male side. Talking about the tyranny of capital, the idolatry of money. Now, this is from a church, by the way, in very recent years, which went out of its way to destroy any vestiges of liberation theology in Central America. Pope John, who is venerated and revered and is being nominated for sainthood, sent his henchman Benedict to Latin America, to Central America, to root out every single pastor, prelate, bishop, and then dispatch them to kind of the backwaters where they would have no impact whatsoever. So this is a terrific new development, that we have the Pope talking about inequality. And another, I think, really terrific development is the French-born Iranian-American Pierre Omidyar, who's the head of eBay. He is given a large amount of money to start up with, slightly smaller than KBOO's budget, $250 million, to start an independent news organization. And he's asked Glenn Greenwald, Laura Poitras, Jeremy Scahill, and others to be involved in that. So I think at a time where investigative journalism is on its heels, it's being absolutely pulverized, particularly by this administration, which loves to prosecute whistleblowers and people who are called leakers, more, in fact, than any administration since the passage of the Espionage Act. All of them combined, Obama and Holder have taken that dubious distinction. I never thought I would say I'd be nostalgic for John Ashcroft, but Eric Holder makes one nostalgic for Ashcroft. Yeah. So people like, let's say, Cy Hirsch, who's one of the last of the investigative journalists, if he can't get information from what's going on inside the Pentagon or the Department of Commerce or any of the other government agencies because people are so afraid to come forward, it's going to really spell the death knell of investigative journalism. And that's why I think this effort to establish something is very, very important and should be encouraged and hopefully expand. Now, I did say that, I've been traveling around the state, and do you know that 2-3 new stations have come on the air? One in Florence is going to come on in the next few months. Newport in the next few weeks. KYAQ, Kayak. They're going to, I hope they do a lot of talk radio, yak yak, with a Q at the end. And in Salem, there's a station already on the air, KMUZ, and they hope to increase their power and range very soon. So there are still these kinds of, beacons of audio independence that are springing up around the country. I don't know about the cable situation here in Oregon, but in Colorado, Jazeera is now available on most TV stations, and you can find excellent documentaries and analyses and perspectives that you won't find anywhere else. And RT TV is not too bad either, if you can, ignore their complete whitewashing of whatever the regime is doing in Moscow. Outside of that, they do some very good reports, and they get a lot of the voices that we hear on KBOO and alternative radio onto RT TV as well. Let's hear it for the workers at SeaTac, not very far from here. All of those thousands of workers who work in the hotels and the motels and the fast food restaurants in the SeaTac area, $15 is now the living wage. And that's just about enough to keep you over the poverty line. Just about enough so you don't have to work on Saturday and Sunday or do a second or third shift. Just about enough that you can get by without even applying for food stamps. So these are, I think, really important developments. In Colorado, where I live, in the recent election, 4 communities passed extremely stringent, unambiguous ordinances banning fracking of any sort. In another development in Boulder, my hometown, we voted to take over the local energy company. Xcel is now owned, so to speak, by the people of the city and county of Boulder. It has been municipalized. So that, so it's not all gloom and doom out there. There are, initiatives, there are movements. I met some fabulous organizers in Eugene and Corvallis over the last couple of days involved in the community rights movement. Maybe some of you know these people. Let's see, Harry McCormick is one. Paul Cienfuegos, of course, based right here. Many people that are actively engaged in restoring community rights, which corporate rights, because of a series of just awful Supreme Court decisions, have been, people's rights have been, corporate rights have been privileged over the rights of individual citizens as well as communities. So this is a kind of movement to get back semblances of democracy, and we have to think more about pushing this forward because it's a very urgent task. In case you haven't noticed, corporations exert a lot of power in the United States. They have two major political parties working 24/7 on their behalf, and guess what? They get certain outcomes that they desire that favor them. I know this is like, wow, I can't hardly believe this, and here and there's Pete DeFazio and a couple of Bernie Sanders in the Senate, but they're just a handful of people of integrity that are standing up to the corporate tsunami of cash that has just saturated the entire political system. It was Ralph Nader who said years ago that we should start putting numbers on the back of our so-called representatives in Washington so that we can clearly identify on whose payroll they are and who they are serving. So, 24 would be Lockheed Martin, 18 would be Boeing, 14 would be Chevron Texaco. So and of course you'd have to put a sell-by date. In case they cut off the money, then, we need more money from them. And that, I think, would help people, better understand the entire system. And I know there's, of course, Nelson Mandela is in the air, and the tremendous achievements. I mean, you talk about someone who made a difference with very few resources. Nelson Mandela is certainly in that line of heroes, a word that's, I think, overused, but he was also grossly misrepresented by the corporate control media. By the way, do any of you know how Mandela was arrested by the South African police? One person, the CIA, our Central Intelligence Agency, fingered him in 1962 for the South African police, leading to 27 years of incarceration. Mandela and the African National Congress was on the State Department terrorist list throughout the 1980s, when there were real terrorists stalking the earth, like the Afghan Mujahideen, which Reagan called them freedom fighters, or the Contras in Nicaragua, who Reagan called the moral equivalent of the founding fathers. So there were certainly terrorists out there, but not the ones identified by the State Department. And this farce, I mean, how do you describe it, continued until 2008. After Mandela had been released, after he had been honored by countries all over the world, after he had been democratically elected as the first president of South Africa, he remained, and the ANC, until 2008. I think it was, I'm not quite certain if I have this right, but he wanted to visit the United States, and he had to get special dispensation from the State Department in order to visit, because he was on the no-fly list. So I know a little bit about this no-fly list, since I was deported from India a little over 2 years ago, finding myself on a no-fly list that the Indian government had designed. So, and the fact also is that Mandela was a committed leftist, and this kind of neoliberal reinvention of Mandela as this avuncular, non-threatening man is very misleading. He was a radical through and through, as was Rosa Parks. So even, someone who I admire and respect greatly, Bill Moyers, fairly recently repeated this canard about Rosa Parks had a long day at the office, and she had tired feet, and she decided not to sit down in the back of the bus. Nothing could be further from the truth. That's a complete misrepresentation of the situation. This was an incredibly motivated and ideologically driven woman who had studied at the Highlander Center, who had imbibed the disciplines of civil disobedience and the tactics of nonviolence. She was the general secretary of the NAACP in Montgomery. And furthermore, the December 1st, 1955 effort was not the first time they tried to launch the Montgomery bus boycott. It was the second or third time. So, you try, you fail, you try, you fail, and then you try again and you win. You know, didn't Gandhi say something like that? You know, first they abuse you, then they try and beat you, and then you win. So this was, I think, another example. We have to recover our history. We have to know precisely. And it was that event in Montgomery, which actually at the same time, by coincidence, a young preacher had just moved from Atlanta to Montgomery, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and he became the voice of the civil rights movement. Now, in 1954, forget about 1954, if on November 30th, 1955, the day before the Rosa Parks action, if you would have said that within a decade that juridical, that is to say legal apartheid in the United States would be eliminated, that African Americans would have full voting rights, people would say, what planet are you living on? Are you looking at these people? Are you looking at Ross Barnett? You're looking at Strom Thurmond? You're looking at real political power. And everything was against African Americans in the South. They had nothing working for them except their own energy, except their own organizational ability. On every single level of power, it was arrayed against them, starting with the sheriff, the local police office, the local courts, the state legislature, the governor's office, right up to the White House. There was all of this power was arrayed against them. Yet somehow they were able to overcome these disadvantages. And it shows you the power of organization and the power of people to accomplish things when they put their mind to it. And just to give you another example, it's not really comparable in terms of national or international influence. KGNU, when it got started in a small group of people, the naysayers way outnumbered the yay-sayers. All the questions, well, who's going to do the program? What happens when it snows or rains? What happens when the equipment fails? Who's going to show up? How can we pay for an engineer? Who's going to constitute a board of directors? Who will hold these people accountable? All these questions were raised. All kinds of obstacles were thrown in front of the people in Boulder before they got the construction permit and then the actual frequency and went on the air May 20th, 1978. Nevertheless, they were able to overcome all these things. So again, it's small acts, as Howard Zinn liked to reminded us, can lead to transformational change. Small little things that you do in your community. We don't know what will happen down the road, and so I think those kinds of things are magical and they are mysterious, and they happen. It happened in Tunisia, in a town you never heard of, where a young 25-year-old street vendor, Mohamed Bouazizi, doused himself with gasoline and killed himself, self-immolation. He had been humiliated by the local cops. Again, they were constantly shaking him down. In the last instant on this day, the police person took away his scales. So effectively, he couldn't work, because if you can't weigh your fruits or vegetables, how are you going to sell them? And so he went immediately to the governor's office, which was in that town nearby. No one would see him. Everybody happened to be out. He was dismissed. He was humiliated and told to go away. And he took this step. And what happened? Well, within 3 weeks, one of the most impregnable, invincible dictatorships in the entire world of Ben Ali completely collapsed. He was on a plane flying to Saudi Arabia to save his buttocks. And I must say that WikiLeaks was also instrumental in one level, because in late November, they issued a whole series of documents, State Department cables, denouncing Ben Ali as a crook, that he and his family were running Tunisia like a mafia kingdom, that they were, ripping off the people. They were going on shopping jaunts to Paris, London, and New York. So that was also out there. And again, chapeau bas, hats off to Chelsea Manning for having released those documents to Julian Assange and to WikiLeaks and getting them out there. And it shows you the hypocrisy of people in power. The U.S. State Department in particular and the White House. They're saying all of these things, sub rosa about Ben Ali, but publicly they're saying he's our ally, he's a moderate, he's a force for stability. These are all code words, by the way. They usually mean the exact opposite. A force of stability means a force of instability. And moderation means someone who is obedient to Washington's diktats. That's how it's always been, and the pattern is very clear, and it takes real intellectual discipline to ignore the history, which the media succeed at doing very skillfully. So they don't see any connection between Ben Ali or Mubarak or Somoza or Duvalier or the Shah or Noriega or any of the other dictators that have always generated very warm support from Washington until the very end, until they're on the plane. And then all of a sudden, whoa, I noticed this with our very wonderful national public radio and Some Things Considered, the afternoon news program. Some of you may listen to that. And then morning edition, that would be MOURNING, because we should be wearing black when we listen, because it's a pretty sad affair. And for decades, and now Mubarak, let's just move on to neighboring Egypt, which was directly influenced by what Mohamed Bouazizi did on December 17th, 2010. In neighboring Egypt, there's a spontaneous uprising. How could this happen? Where did these people come from? I mean, was it all social media? Was it some kind of abracadabra, magic carpet? The Middle East, Arabs, Orientals. Could be some magic at work here. But for decades, Mubarak was in power for more than 30 years. He was called a moderate, a force for stability, an ally, a reasonable person in a region of the world that is in constant ferment and torment, I must say. And then all of a sudden, about the second or third week, when it became apparent that this tidal wave in Tahrir Square, and not just in Cairo, but in Alexandria and Port Said, Luxor, other cities all across Egypt, this tyrant was going to come down, then NPR suddenly changed its adjectives. Mubarak becomes a hardliner, a strongman, a dictator, an autocrat. But for decades, he was a moderate force for stability, a very reasonable person that we could all deal with. So there is a serious problem in the country, and I call it prostitution. It's really disgusting how these prostitutes flaunt themselves in front of people with power. They immediately, go horizontal and basically do anything that people in power want them to do in order to advance their careers. They're lapdogs with laptops. They are, competing for the best hair on the air. I'm talking about people like Diane Sawyer, for example, who's also married to a great Broadway and film director, Mike Nichols, but that doesn't count for anything. Night after night, if you can bear to listen, I have to because it's part of my job description. I have to know what they are saying. All of these ideas are embedded in their narrative and in their questioning. I mean, Charlie Rose is the master of this. I advise people when I give seminars or, little teach-ins on how to do interviewing and this kind of work, I just tell people, watch Charlie Rose and do the opposite. And you'll be off to a head start. He has to be one of the most unctuous, ologenous, commentators in all of television. And, he's everywhere. I mean, he's on CBS every morning. He's on PBS every night, the Petroleum Broadcasting Service, KOPB here in Portland. We can't, and he's on 60 Minutes. I mean, you can't avoid this guy. He's like ubiquitous. He's everywhere. And, he loves his favorite guests who are his favorite guests? Not Noam Chomsky, not Michael Parenti, not Naomi Klein, not Barbara Ehrenreich, but people like Jeff Bezos, who he had on 60 Minutes last week. People like war criminals like Henry Kissinger. Then Thomas Friedman, his other very favorite person in the media. So you get the same old golden Rolodex of pundits and experts, who give you a range of opinion from A to B. And I used to say A to B, but I think that's too generous. It's more, I'm serious. I think it's more like A to A squared now. That's how narrow it is. Instead of A to Z, we're getting, A to A squared. Oh, and I left out another piece of good news. Our dear comrade Noam Chomsky is 85 years old today. Yay, Noam. And Alexander Cockburn used to quip that the two greatest disasters to befall U.S. imperialism both happened on December 7th, the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor and Noam Chomsky's birthday. But I have the latest book with Noam. Time for a commercial break. Power Systems just came out. I hope you'll pick it up. And, it is that time of year. It's always very awkward to do these kinds of commercial messages inside what is purportedly advertised as an anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist speech. But KBOO, quite frankly, was unable to come up with my $100,000 speaking fee. So I got to make ends meet. And I'll do that if you get the book and other books. And I mentioned whistleblowers. The program on KBOO coming up this Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock is with none other than Ray McGovern, a 27-year-old veteran of the CIA who talks about whistleblowers and very excellent. He's a great storyteller, too. There's a little thing, a joke he tells in there. I left it in. I was thinking, should I cut it out or leave it in? I finally decided to leave it in. He was told by his grandfather, who's Irish, why did the sun never set on the British Empire? And little Ray was trying to come up with an answer, and Granddaddy said, because God never trusted the British in the dark. And in many ways, we are the successors to the British Empire. And in many ways, and in fact, exceeding the power of the British Empire, because the U.S. has 735 military bases around the world. You'll be all proud to know that we just launched yet another aircraft carrier in the last couple of weeks, named after that great statesman, Gerald R. Ford. I know, it's awesome. I mean, one just has to, be in great admiration of why we have 11 aircraft carrier battle groups, and we're closing schools in Philadelphia. Detroit is bankrupt. Emergency rooms in Seattle are being closed, or hours are being reduced. Teachers are being laid off all over the country. Where's the money? Has anyone heard of the military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned the country about on January 17th, 1961? Or at the beginning of his term? I mean, in between, he did terrible things, by the way, destroying democracy in Guatemala, destroying it in Iran. But on these two things, if you just take them in isolation, he said remarkable things. He said at the beginning, in his Cross of Iron speech, in 1953, he said every penny spent on the military is ultimately a theft from people in need and from people who are hungry and from children who are ill-clothed. And just put that with at the end of his presidency, the military-industrial complex speech, his farewell address. To show you how far to the right the country has moved, if Eisenhower were alive today, he would not have a place in either the Democratic or the Republican Party. He'd be considered too radical. What are you, nuts? You're challenging the Pentagon? You're questioning the centrality of the military in the formation of government policy? Nowhere. He would be nowhere. So sorry, that was a commercial message. Back to the 4 CDs I have. Richard Wolff, who's absolutely the best on capitalism. This is called Naked Capitalism. Vandana Shiva of India on GMOs. And Noam Chomsky, The U.S. is a Rogue State, a talk he gave in Gainesville, Florida. So these are brand new. You can get them over there when we're done at a greatly reduced, KBOO-friendly price. So that's how I support myself, incidentally. The program is given free to radio stations, and I go around and rant and rave and try and flog books and CDs. But I have a lot of fun doing it, and I consider myself very fortunate and lucky. Now, I want to go back to a little bit of some hardcore diatribe. Last tango for democracy, from Waziristan to Fort Meade to Langley, from oligarchy to plutocracy to dollarocracy. A nation of sheep will beget a government of wolves. Edward R. Murrow said that. The recent and ongoing theatrics in Washington are a sideshow to the main event, the ongoing evisceration and hollowing out of democracy. The political system in which the capitalist economy effectively functions, for the few, is called democracy. It might be likened to a Sotheby's auction with the most lucrative objects, seats, secretaries of state and other officials, ambassadorships, in the halls of power going to the highest bidder. It's no accident. It was outlined at the get-go when the country was formed. James Madison, one of the founding fathers and major designer, he wrote almost all the Federalist Papers, by the way, two-time president of the United States. He said very clearly, when asked about the aim of government, he said, "The aim of government is to protect the opulent minority against the majority." There it is. To protect the opulent minority against the majority. I mean, if that is not the 1%, 99% Occupy formula, I don't know what is. But we have a form of democracy here, but it's procedural democracy. It's called elections, which have turned into multi-billion-dollar campaign spending extravaganzas, a cash cow for the corporate control media, particularly TV. And, very soon, probably in a short period of time, they're going to start the 2016 election. Elections now seem to go on as soon as, one election ends, then the next election starts. The Supreme Court's infamous Citizens United decision of January 2010, allowing corporate money to flood politics, further corrodes and corrupts democracy. In effect, it legalized bribery. And while I like to denounce Thomas Friedman, who I find absolutely deplorable and apologist for imperialism and predatory capitalism, that's not an applause line. That should be a weeping line, given the influence he has, right? He called it legalized bribery. In one of his New York Times columns, he said this allows for legalized bribery in Congress. But its defenders, the defenders of Citizens United, say, well, money is free speech. You, Joe and Jane Citizen, are free to set up your own political action committee and give money to your favorite politician, just like the Koch brothers and Sheldon Adelson, right? It's a level playing field. Yeah, sure. A tsunami of cash drowns politics out, making a farce of any notion of equality and fairness. And things may get worse. The Supreme Court actually has a case in its docket which will allow for unlimited private money to be spent, given in secret to politicians and political campaigns. So a fundamental question in all of this, of course, is never posed. What are the communication needs of a democratic society? The role of the mediocre media and press corps is crucial to the manufacture of consent, which is, to use Walter Lippmann's phrase, the media, that is to say a handful of corporate conglomerates, defend the class interests of the owners and the domestic and foreign policies of the state. It is a monochromatic one-note samba. They replicate the tropes of benevolence and altruism of U.S. policy. So whatever is being proposed, whether it's Bush 1 or Bush 2 or Clinton or Carter, whoever it might be, whatever president happens to be in the Oval Office, all of the imperial interventions, most of them extremely violent, by the way, are always cloaked in benevolence. And if something goes wrong, well, 2 million Vietnamese, 1 million Cambodians and Laotians are killed. It's a tragedy. It was a mistake. They never will concede the fundamental crime that is conceded. This was, a misunderstanding. There wasn't enough background. We didn't understand the Asian mind and things like that. So what we're seeing, of course, also, you can never pronounce the adjective American before the noun imperialism. It's absolutely forbidden. You will never hear it come out of the mouths of any of these network anchors who are anchors for good reason. They're anchored to power. That's why they're given these anchorages. And that is never up for discussion. Of course, you can talk, till the chickens come home to roost about British imperialism, what the terrible things the Dutch did in Indonesia, the horrors that the Belgians carried out in the Congo, and, back to Roman and Greek imperialism, but never describing U.S. imperialism. So mistakes are made. Now, it's interesting that the same kind of treatment is accorded to the economic system, which is working really well for the 1%. In case you haven't noticed, we're in a recovery. This is the 4th year of the recovery. I know it's hard, but apparently we're recovering. The stock market's at 16,000. So they're recovering really well, but the fact of the matter is that just a handful of people own most of those stocks. And you'll see that when it comes to the economic system, the focus is on rotten apples as opposed to rotten barrels. And that's a very crucial distinction that is maintained consistently. There's no discussion about the system where these rotten apples are constantly coming forward. So everyone can be very virtuous and righteous about Bernie Madoff, and beat their chest. What a horrible man, what he did to those poor grandmothers and those orphans. And, he ripped off the most vulnerable people. Throw the book at him. And they did, they gave him 150 years. Or, what about Raj Rajaratnam of this hedge fund in New York? His friend Rajat Gupta calls him up and says, Gupta's with Goldman Sachs, and says that Goldman Sachs is about to make this huge investment. You better go and buy those stocks. And he made like $1 billion on what is called insider trading. That fateful moment in the Oliver Stone movie Wall Street, one of the fateful moments, the young protege played by Charlie Sheen, Bud Fox, in the movie, still has some ideals. He went to college and he thinks, you should be honest when you're in business in Wall Street. And Gordon Gekko, played brilliantly by Michael Douglas, hits him on the lapel there and says, kid, you got to be kidding. Everybody's cheating. That's the name of the game. That's how business is conducted. It's all about insider trading. It's all about gaining advantage in order to maximize profits. It's profits über alles. Even when it comes to the environment, there was a New Yorker cartoon that Michael Parenti brought to my attention that came out where there was some stockholders gathered, let's say a group like this in a hotel in New York, and they were getting pretty agitated because, let's say I'm the CEO and, you've given me my chalet in Chamonix, a private jet, golf club membership, a penthouse in New York, a second home in Aspen. And, I'm making $10, $15 million a year in salary, but your dividends are down. You're very unhappy. And you start clamoring and making noise. And then at the bottom of the cartoon, the CEO gets up and says, well, I understand your concerns. And while the long-term prospects for the planet are very grim indeed, we have an opportunity right now to make a financial killing. And everybody rises to their feet and gives him a standing ovation. So capitalism itself is an economic system that has to destroy the planet because it is based on plundering and looting of resources. There is no sense, there is no consciousness, moral or otherwise, of stewardship, of nurturing the planet, of taking care of what Carl Sagan called this pale blue dot in the universe where this magic of life exists, as it exists, as far as we know, nowhere else. And I'm reminded of, the apocryphal story attributed to Chief Seattle. It really doesn't matter whether he said it or not, because the veracity is there. It's true. He noted the nature of acquisitiveness that the European settlers had. And he warned them that if you continue to soil the bed you sleep in, you will ultimately choke on your own toxic fumes. And we are choking on our own toxic fumes. The signs are very clear. We are like the passengers, we are like the crew of the Pequod in Melville's masterwork, Moby Dick. And we're driven by a mad, demonic, monomaniacal Ahab, who represents to me capitalism. And Moby Dick, the white whale, is nature, purity. And Ahab, because of his charisma and his tremendous sense of power, there was only one crew member that dared to speak up against Ahab, and it was Starbuck. He said, don't go through with this. Don't do it. Let's turn the ship around. We can go home now. We've got a lot of whale meat. We'll do very well. Our families are waiting for us. Ahab said no, and even Starbuck was swept up in the kind of mad euphoria that Ahab was able to generate. So, there's so many of these, obviously the Titanic is another example, of moving deck chairs on the Titanic, which is what all these so-called climate control conferences are about, from Rio to Copenhagen to Warsaw to Durban. They're jokes. They're complete farces. You get all these people, with their Chardonnays or Cabernet Sauvignon, lifting their glass and saying they're green. Meanwhile, the entire conference is orchestrated by ExxonMobil, BP, Chevron Texaco, and the military-industrial complex. There is no progress. They are moving deck chairs on the Titanic and trying to persuade the people of the world that they really care about the environment. You could just look at the NewsHour on PBS. It's often, there are commercials. They're not called commercials. They're underwriting announcements. But they're commercials, exactly, from ExxonMobil and BP telling the American people and the people of the world that they care about the environment. They are actually green corporations. Well, if you believe things like that, there are a lot of bridges in Brooklyn I can sell you at the end of this talk. And I will give the money to KBOO, which could really use it and put it to good use. Right. So something is seriously wrong in the United States. And it doesn't take a genius to see this. And years back, the great Canadian songwriter and poet Leonard Cohen wrote a song called Democracy is Coming to the USA. He was saying that in the affirmative. I think now if he were writing it, you would have to put an interrogative mark at the end of the sentence because it is a question. Is democracy coming to the USA? We'd like to see more of it, but what we're seeing is quite the opposite. And then we have, lots of other things to talk about, but I know we want to get out to the ball game. I was recently in, by the way, the Trailblazers are having a terrific year this year. And just last night, I saw about 6 or 7 minutes of analysis on the team and passing and the strategies. And it was very developed and in detail. And I was wondering, did they ever talk about drone attacks in Pakistan in that kind of detail? I travel a lot. Maybe I was away that weekend when they did the one detailed report on drones or any other, important public issue. Well, recently I was in Albuquerque and met the wonderful Raging Grannies. Why are all my favorite organizations mostly run by women, like Code Pink, which I adore? And so the Raging Grannies gave me a couple of poems that they recently wrote. And Frank Sinatra, I'm not, maybe Tony Bennett, but give me a break here. Take me out to the bomb game, take me out to the wars. Buy me no missiles or drones, Barack. I'll be glad if they never come back. Oh, it's boo, boo, boo for the home team. If they should win one, we lose. And it's one strike, we're out in the old bomb game. And this is two from Raging Grannies in Albuquerque. Drones in the sky. Oh, give us a home where no predators roam, where no pilotless lethal planes fly, where poor folks are safe in their own living space, where no drones rain death from the sky. Drones, drones in the sky, who decides over which country they'll fly? And if their bombs hit off the target a bit, many innocent people will die. Our pilot checks in with a Starbucks in hand and sits down at the keyboard to play. He makes the bombs fly, he can watch the folks die, and go home at the end of the day. He rains the bombs down where the folks gather round for a wedding, a funeral, or pleasure. And when other folks come to take the injured home, he zaps them again for good measure. And when he has killed the requisite number, a medal of honor he's given. It should make us think, it should make us wonder, by what code of morals we're driven. Drones, drones in the sky. Raging Grannies. Now I'm going to close with some poetry. What is this guy doing up here? Singing poems. One, excuse me, this was Edward Said's very favorite poem. Edward Said, the Palestinian-American, Columbia University professor, author of Orientalism, and someone I had the privilege of knowing and working with for many years. This was his favorite poem. It was read at his memorial service at Riverside Church in New York. It's called Waiting for the Barbarians. It's written by a Greek, an Egyptian Greek who died in the 1930s. His name is Constantine Cavafy. And it speaks to a lot of the hysteria that's being generated by the CIA, NSA, DEA, and FBI, and all the rest. Waiting for the Barbarians. It's also an excellent novel by Coetzee, the South African novelist who won a Nobel Prize a few years ago. He was kind of inspired by the poem. Waiting for the Barbarians. What are we waiting for, assembled in the forum? The barbarians are due here today. Why isn't anything happening in the Senate? Why do the senators just sit there and do nothing? Because the barbarians are coming today. What laws can the senators make now? Once the barbarians are here, they'll do the legislating. Why did our emperor get up so early? Why is he sitting at the city's main gate on his throne wearing the crown? Because the barbarians are coming today, and the emperor is waiting to receive their leader. He has even prepared a scroll to give him, replete with titles and imposing names. Why have our two councils come out today wearing their scarlet togas, with rings sparkling with magnificent emeralds? Why are they carrying elegant canes beautifully worked in silver and gold? Because the barbarians are coming today, and things like that dazzle the barbarians. Why don't our distinguished orators come forward as usual to make speeches, say what they have to say? Because the barbarians are coming today, and they're bored with rhetoric and public speaking. Why this sudden restlessness, this confusion? How serious people's faces have become? Why are the streets and squares emptying so rapidly? Because night has fallen, and the barbarians have not come. And some who have just returned from the border say there are no barbarians. And now, what's going to happen to us without barbarians? They were, those people, a kind of solution. Marge Piercy, great contemporary poet, her collection, The Moon is Always Female. Howard Zinn liked to read this poem as well. This is called The Low Road, and it's about, it's about solidarity, it's about community, it's about KBOO, it's about overcoming differences and narrow, narcissistic, contentions that, or, issues that people might have for something much larger, the low road. What can they do to you? Whatever they want. They can set you up, they can bust you, they can break your fingers, they can burn your brain with electricity. They'll give you drugs till you can't walk, can't remember. They can do anything. You can't stop them. Alone, you can fight, you can refuse, you can take what revenge you can, but they simply roll over you. But two people fighting back to back can do something. Two people can keep each other sane, can give support, conviction, love, massage, hope, sex. Three people are a delegation. With four, you can play bridge and start an organization. With six, you can rent a whole house, eat pie for dinner with no seconds. 100 fill a hall. It goes on one at a time. It starts when you care to act. It starts when you do it again and they said no. It starts when you say we and know who you mean, and each day you mean one more. Now, I know I'm in, sophisticated metropolitan Portland, so there must be many Urdu speakers out there. And I want to share a poem from the greatest Urdu poet of the 20th century, Faiz Ahmed Faiz, F-A-I-Z. It's curious. His first name and last name is the same. He was born in what was then British India, in the Punjab in 1911, and he died in Lahore, Pakistan, in 1984. His poetry is read almost at every demonstration in Pakistan, in India, Nepal, even in Bangladesh. And people hold up placards with this key word, the name of this poem, which is bol, B-O-L, which also it's the imperative to speak in Urdu and Hindi. So when you say bol, you mean action. You mean don't be silent, be a dissenter, stand up for justice. So, bol. And Urdu, by the way, I'm not being facetious, is spoken by hundreds of millions of people. It's the national language of Pakistan. It's the official state language of Jammu and Kashmir in India. It's spoken all over North India, and just it's a very rich language, a mixture of Hindi and Persian and Turkish and Arabic, and it has come out as this very poetic, powerful, expressive language, Urdu. Bol. Bol ke lab azad hai tere, bol zaban ab tak teri hai. Speak, your lips are free. Speak, your tongue is still yours. This magnificent body is still yours. Speak, your life is still yours. Speak, there is little time, but little though there is, it is enough time. Enough before the body perishes and the tongue atrophies. Speak, the truth still lives. Say what you have to say. Speak, your lips are free. Bol. Bol, bol. Thank you very much.